Welcome to Turkey Trends, part of Ahwal podcast series. My name is Nervana Mahmoud. The first female foreign minister of Libya, Najla Al-Mangoush, have said in a press conference with her Turkish counterpart earlier this month, asking for Turkey to cooperate to end the presence of foreign forces and mercenaries in Libya. Her call have triggered angry responses in certain corners of the political spectrum in Libya. To discuss the dynamics between Turkey and Libya, it's a pleasure to welcome for the second time Libyan expert Aya Burweila. Aya, thanks for joining me.
It's a pleasure to be here, Nervana.
So, forgive me for my first question. I am used to Arab politicians being accused of treasons, stuff like that. But to be blamed for calling for foreign forces to withdraw from the country is new to me. Can you explain why certain groups, figures have attacked Najla for her statement?
Well, it's the turn of events has been really Kafkaesque, and it's become typical of what's been happening in Libya for over 6 years now. There are certain groups who condemned the foreign minister Najla's call to remove foreign forces from Libyan sovereign territory from her country. And the people, it's important to be specific about who has condemned Najla, and it's the usual suspects. It's the Islamists. And the Islamists have been acting as a proxy for Turkey and Qatar for a decade now in Libya. And Turkey has been acting like the military force that protects their racket in Libya. So these forces, these proxies, have been occupying the capital since 2011. After NATO intervention, there was a huge problem in Libya with all the proliferation of weapons, different militias. And since 2011, these people have been around. It's been a challenge for every government to dismantle them. And since 2014, when the Islamist parties lost the elections, they violently overtook the capital with the military help of Turkey and Qatar, and they want to keep it that way.
Perfect. That's a very good point, because if you ask any Turkish expert about or pundit about Libya, they think or they try to project that history started when Haftar marched to the capital, and they label it as a coup. While I saw a tweet from you after the Libyan foreign minister was attacked, reminding people of what the events happened in 2014, which is done by Operation Dawn, which is a group, I think, or a militia group. So I will be grateful if you explain to my viewers what happened in 2014.
Well, so everybody's talking about Haftar seizing Tripoli, and that is a very gross misrepresentation of the facts on the ground and historical Libyan realities. First of all, Haftar was in Tripoli. He was expelled with the elected parliament. What happened in 2014 was Libya had its elections, democratic elections, and the Islamist parties lost. And this wasn't kind of what people planned in 2011 when Qatar was supporting various factions, including Islamist extremists. The idea was to get rid of Gaddafi and to replace Gaddafi with Islamist groups. And that worked for a while. I mean, they were in power democratically in the beginning, but by 2014, the Libyan public was disenchanted with them and they were voted out resoundingly. And at that point, they violently, the Islamist factions, a coalition called Operation Dawn, nominally from Misrata, invaded the capital and forced the parliament out. At that point, this is where you hear about Operation Dignity. Operation Dignity was Haftar's force, along with Libya's special forces, who fought to defend the parliament against Operation Dawn, the Islamist Operation Dawn, and they lost. They were overwhelmed. Despite the fact that they also had Egyptian assistance then and Emirati assistance, but the Turkish and the Qatari powers overwhelmed them. You have to keep in mind that Qatar has been sending weapons to Libya since 2011, over 200,000 tons of weapons. So the advantage was always towards the Islamists. In the meantime, Benghazi was overrun by various jihadi groups, including ISIS, Al-Qaeda affiliates, as well as local militants. And that is why the parliament moved to Tobruk, and the head of the military went to Rajma. And 2015, March 2015, Haftar was appointed by the only internationally recognized and democratically elected parliament of Libya, the HOR, to head the Libyan National Army. So the attack on Tripoli that happened in April 19 was actually the last phase of the army's mandate and cause to free all of Libya from militant groups and terrorist organizations.
Thanks for explaining that. It's a lot of people talk about foreign presence. They mention Russia, Egypt, United Arab Emirates, but I'm glad that you mentioned the impact of Qatar, although it doesn't have troops on the ground, but they armed several militias and they have a strong influence on them in Libya, obviously as Turkey. Now, coming to the 2019 and what the Turks call it a coup, despite obviously there was an earlier coup if we're going to go with that narrative. But let's to talk about how Turkey now saying there was a government, it was an internationally or UN recognized government, and they called the Turkish for help. And that's why our existence in Libya is legitimate. How you counter that narrative?
That's a very good question, Nervana, because it addresses the fundamental reasons of this conflict, which is an issue of legitimacy. And as you know, without legitimacy, there is no peace. And I wish more analysts would look through not the symptoms of what's happening in Libya, but what has caused it. The GNA, for example, is one of the biggest drivers of the conflict in Libya by virtue of not being selected by Libyans. After the elections happened and the Islamist parties violently removed the elected parliament, the UN came up with a solution how to bring these two sides together. And they came up with a Khirat agreement to come up with a government of national accord. And so they proposed a unity government to bring these two sides together. The problem was they accepted, both sides accepted this process, and a government was proposed, but it was proposed with zero transparency. The system that it proposed was actually going to empower the losers of the first election and override the HOR, the parliament. And the list was simply not accepted or ratified by the House of Parliament, which is different with what you see with the GNU today. The GNU, the Government of National Unity of 2021, was ratified by the parliament, making it legitimate or more legitimate in the eyes of Libyans. So what happened with the GNA was so you had the internationally recognized parliament of Libya, elected by the people, who didn't recognize the internationally recognized government. And this was a huge mistake, that the international community gave recognition to a government that was not ratified by its own people. So constitutionally, the GNA has zero legitimacy. But if we even forget the issue of constitutional legitimacy of the GNA, which is essentially a foreign appointed government, which is unheard of in modern history in the 21st century, it was only supposed to exist for 1 year, a transitional government. That is what the GNA is, with a maximum ability to be renewed for another 1 year.
Right.
The GNA has expired in 2017.
Yeah. Just to highlight the audience, the GNA is the one who called for Turkey, just for people not to lose track. Yeah.
Exactly. So what we have is a government that's expired, whose mandate was actually to dismantle the militias in Tripoli, calling for a foreign power to send in an occupation and mercenaries to protect its illegitimate government. But even before that, Nervana, the GNA had, in the beginning, there wasn't such an antagonistic relationship with the military. There were multiple agreements in Paris, in Egypt, in Abu Dhabi, agreeing to cooperate with the army to remove these militias, per the request of all Libyans, except the Islamists who were acting as proxies of Turkey and Qatar. So this is what, so since then, since 2014, the capital has been a gangster's paradise. The militias captured all these institutions, including the banks. Libyans have been left without basic services. Many live under poverty levels. And there's as we say in Arabic, the complete fawda in Libya. So there is no, the JNA has no right to call for any foreign troops. In fact, that is a violation of the Sanctions Committee. And even if the GNA, let's just say they said, oh, let's have the Turks come in, we have Turkish forces in Libyan territory, which, by the way, no, if you speak to any Libyan, especially since our ancestors fought so many to remove the Ottoman Empire, to remove Italian colonists, the very idea of having a foreign occupation is very much against the Libyan psyche, Libyan patriotism. But just say the GNA wanted to do that. Even if it wished to do that, it would still have to go through the parliament and to be ratified, to be legal, constitutional, and legitimate. So this is something that's not being discussed.
Absolutely. Right. Moving from that, at the backdrop of what happened, there was also Turkey exploratory talks with Egypt about rapprochement between the two countries. And the part of one of the main issues of difference between the two countries is Libya. Egypt called for removal of all foreign forces and mercenaries out of Libya, while Turkey is saying our presence is legal. They rushed to make that statement before the talks with Egypt, just to say that this is something for them, they are not willing to compromise. But I noticed from Turkish pundits speaking on Arab TVs, Clubhouse, etc., saying that the mercenaries, the Syrian mercenaries, are not ours. So they are trying to somehow disown their relationship with the Syrian mercenary. I see you laughing. So please explain.
I'm laughing because there's always something new from the Turkish Foreign Service and
yes, and
their outlets.
That myself.
I mean, they have no, they're not tethered to the truth. I mean, most analysts have to kind of be loyal to the truth, but
okay, do you see that Turkey can make an agreement to say, okay, our formal troops or advisors or whatever they want to name them will stay, but can we get rid of the Syrian mercenaries? Do you see Turkish presence in Libya can survive without the existence of the Syrian mercenaries who are helping the Islamist troops or the Islamist militias in Tripoli in the west side of Libya?
Of course not. They sent over 50,000 Syrian troops, and right now there's over 11,000 remaining. Just to illustrate to you, by the way, the West, the capital Tripoli, has the biggest population of any city in Libya. To illustrate the lack of popularity of the GNA, they couldn't even raise enough troops to join the militias, because even within Tripoli, the GNA is incredibly unpopular. If you remember the Ghargour massacre, 2013, where Tripoli residents were so tired of militia tyranny, they protested, and militias from Misrata gunned them down. It's known as the Ghargour massacre. And again, in August 2020, the residents of Tripoli protested, and they were gunned down by the UN-backed government. So they cannot survive without Syrian mercenaries. But on the question of legitimacy, because the Turkish foreign minister, which is surreal, imagine being a foreign minister telling a minister of a country that we refuse to leave.
Yes.
This is an ugly form of imperialism, or this neo-Ottoman racket, this neo-Ottoman ideology that the President Erdoğan seems to be under. They said that they had an agreement with the GNA. So they had an unconstitutional agreement with an unconstitutional government. But even that, the GNA, at some point, there was a part of the GNA that realized that Turkish occupation was going to be very horrible for Libya. And they realized if things kept going as they are, they wouldn't even have a country left to exploit. Yes. That the Turks would really just destroy the country. And that's where you saw the 5+5 Geneva Accord. Right. So you had people from the GNA, including Ahmed Maghdi, who wanted to solve the situation. They wanted to reunite the country. So in October 2020, there was an agreement between the GNA after the agreement between Turkey, calling for all forces to leave, Russian, Egyptian, anything, because Libya has become a Woodstock of foreign mercenaries. Correct. So what the Turkish foreign minister is saying was outrageous. It is unacceptable. There's no way Libyans, the majority of Libyans, are going to accept foreign occupation or exploitation by foreign countries.
Absolutely. Do you see, I mean, on the other side, just to finish the picture, Turkey always used the Russian mercenaries as an excuse. Do you think that Haftar forces and their backers, the United Arab Emirates and Russia, would be happy to withdraw the Russian forces, whatever they want to label them, logistical support mercenaries, just to take any excuse from the Turks?
Well, here's the thing with the Russian mercenaries. We don't have actual evidence on how many they are. But what we see with the Russian mercenaries is that they're not involved in capturing political institutions of Libya. They're doing security work.
Right.
Libya is a huge country, and one of the mistakes the United States did after the murder of Christopher Stevens is to leave the country as an open field for all the terrorist organizations that created outposts in Libya. And this, terrorism is an international problem. There's Security Council resolutions, one after the other, that obliges countries to fight terrorism, international terrorism. And Libya, being a failed or precarious state, is not in the interest of any country. Not in for Russians, not for Emiratis, not for Egypt, not for Europe, not for the Americans. So what the Russians did was to avoid situations where Libyan oil fields fall into the hands again of militant terrorist groups such as the Benghazi Defense Brigades. They realized that if all these countries want to continue doing business, they better make sure that Libya is a secure place. So the difference now, Libyans want, including myself, all foreign mercenaries to leave.
Right.
But there's a bit of a difference between mercenaries who are involved in political processes, who capture Libyan banks, who capture Libyan institutions, who stop Libyan elections from happening, and say Syrian mercenaries who even AFRICOM have accused of sexually assaulting Libyan women in Libya, as they do in northeast Syria. So ideally, Libyans want all mercenaries out, Russia and Turkey. Egypt wants the same. If you recall in last January, the Moscow deal, and nobody talks about the Moscow deal, which the GNA signed. The Moscow deal was an agreement to divide Libya between two spheres of influence, between Russia and Turkey.
Wow.
And the LNA and the HR refused. So you saw this whole trajectory of dividing Libya, which is something Libyans want, the army doesn't want. So in many ways, Libya and Turkey and Russia are two sides of the same coin. But so far, the Russian mercenaries have not been as destructive to Libya. They're probably maintaining weapons from Soviet-era weapons, helping with securing the oil outposts. But so far, they're not getting involved in political processes.
Right. How do you see the future from here? Like the Turks-Egyptian talk end up without even a time scale of meeting the Turkish foreign minister with the Egyptian foreign minister. Mostly both Egypt and Turkey have interest in have a sphere of influence in Libya. I saw an article today saying the trade between Turkey and Libya have increased 59%. Surprise, surprise. How do you see the future from here? Do you see an election will happen? Do you see the Turks will withdraw? How do you see the future?
Well, Nervana, right today, Libya is in a good place.
Right.
Against all odds. You have to remember also that there's a new administration in the United States that is very different from the Obama administration and from the Trump administration. The Biden administration is very serious about containing Turkey's malevolent influence in the East Med. And you see, there's been Security Council resolutions that I regard as excellent. They call for elections. They call for a unified military, as the Geneva Accords have also called for, and they called for the removal of all foreign mercenaries, Russian, Turkish, Sudanese, whatever they are. So the international community today is far more serious about getting Libya out of this mess than it was before.
Right.
So this is very, very good. And there's going to be a lot of pressure you'll see in Turkey to do the same. And internally, Turkey is in deep trouble. Turkey is sending all these troops. Why? So they can continue treating the Libyan central bank as their personal slush fund.
Right.
Even the armored vehicles that GNA bought to protect its militia tyranny was from Turkey,
Right.
from a company that Qatar also has shares in,
Wow.
to illustrate the racket that is going on. Now, it is okay for countries to have interests in Libya. This is what it means to be a state. Libya, under a normal government, should have good relations with as many countries as possible. But there is a difference between a country that is predatorial, and there's a difference between a country such as Egypt that wishes to both have good relations with Libya and promote mutual interests, economic interests. Right. So far, all these business deals that you refer to, Nervana, with Turkey, they've gone without tender, zero transparency, under extreme corruption, and this is not acceptable, not to Libyans, not to anybody else. I believe, even though the Muslim Brotherhood wants to make sure, and all these proxies want to make sure elections are not going to happen, I think today the terrain is very, very different. And by the end of the year, we will have elections, and those who will try to impede elections, according to the UN Security Council resolutions, will come under sanctions. So today, it's a very, very serious environment, and the Turks are on notice as well.
Aya, one last question. The Muslim Brotherhood in Libya have changed their front, and they now have a new name and a new slogan. One last question. How can you just briefly say what is going on?
So there's a lot of things going on, which is very interesting. So they've rebranded themselves as a revival party and an NGO. And so this is because they're extremely unpopular. It's like they're trying to deceive audiences as to their nature and who they are. So they're changing their name and their status. Of course, as an NGO status, it'll also help gaining funding to their activities with less scrutiny. So even the Muslim Brotherhood has been listed as a terrorist organization in Libya by the House of Representatives, after it was revealed by the Attorney General that they were cooperating with Hamas to get Libyan weapons to Palestine. So they're trying to rebrand to deceive the international community. They recognize that the environment in Europe is also changing towards the Muslim Brotherhood. It's getting more strict. People are beginning to realize more and more that even that when they are not violent, they contribute to an ideological environment that is conducive to extremism. So they're under a lot of pressure, and they're also under internal pressure as well. There's a camp within that's pro-Sadiq Ariani, based in Turkey, and there's one that's more pro-Mohammed Sawan, who was the head of the previous Justice and Construction Party. So there's also internal divisions between the MB, and they're trying to rebrand because they know that if there's a new government, their future is over. Their reputation is done in Libya. Right. So they want to create a distance just in case there is a new government and there is elections. They want to make sure that they're not tarnished by the label of Muslim Brotherhood. So it's a scam. It's another one. So, but everybody knows it now. But I'm just warning you that expect certain journalists to be playing along and saying the persecuted NGO civil society. Yes. So it's all in scam. Before. Yeah, it's the same tactics. It's the same playbook everywhere.
So first, at the end of this podcast, I just want to pay my respect to the brave Libyan women, women like you, like the Libyan foreign minister. You ladies are the future of Libya, and Aya, thank you so much for joining me in this podcast for the second time.
Thank you very much, Nervana.
Thank you. Again,
it's always a pleasure.
Thank you. And again, thank you for listening to Turkey Trends. This is Nervana Mahmoud.